Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Blue Table Talk. And my name is Tawana Collins Booth. And I have my co-host here with me, Mr. Arnell Brady, speech language and pathologist. And since we on YouTube live now, we're going to give time for everyone to come in. So I'm gonna let all my YouTube subscribers get a chance to come in the room before we actually start. So come on in the room. Before we actually start. So come on in the room. And it's the end of Black History Month today, so we're going to be talking about autism and Black History Part 2.
And there's quite a bit. There's quite a bit that can be said about Black history, autism, and speech language pathology. I think you had looked up Hallie Q. Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Hallie Q. Brown was in the late 18th and early 19th century.
Yeah, it said 19th century.
She was a famous elocutionist, what we would call at that time, and an educator. Because you see, speech language pathology really got its start in public schools in America with the speech teacher, the speech correctionist. And at some time they were called elocutionists that were working with students and helping them to improve their speech. And then it simply evolved into speech language pathology over the years. It's had a number of name changes. But, it can go back even further than that. I've traveled to Egypt and went into some of the tombs and pyramids. There was one tomb I went into that was dated 2700 BC. That is 2,700 years before Christ. And on the walls in that tomb, written in hieroglyphics, was a story about a surgeon, a doctor, who was attempting to help a man who had had a shipwreck. And he had a gashing wound in his head. And the hieroglyphics said that he poured goat's milk into the wound and started working with the man's speech. And a lot of times we jokingly say that was the earliest written history of speech therapy. But we know it goes back even further than that. It's just that we don't have records of it. But as long as man has been talking, well, I'm sure we have had people that have tried to help others improve their speech. Chicago is a very interesting place because there is the National Black Association for Speech, Language, and Hearing, along with the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. Of course, the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association is the credentialing body. This is what certifies people to become speech language pathologists. But the National Black Association's primary mission is to help to develop people to become, especially minorities, Black and brown, to become speech language pathologists and audiologists in this country. And the reason that it got started was because there were some speech language pathologists that were dissatisfied with the way the American Speech Language Association was handling the whole Black issue in terms of access to speech therapists, in terms of diagnosing children and adults with different types of communication disorders. What we saw was too many Black children were being diagnosed with a speech language disorder when it was really just a speech language difference. And so the Black in the association tried to take that issue to the leadership. The leadership did not listen to them. And so they barged into the meeting and had a protest at the convention in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
And when they left that convention, they made a pact that they were going to organize among themselves to address some of the issues affecting Blacks in communication disorders in this country. And they came to Chicago in 1979, where they had their first meeting. And that's when they organized what is now known as the National Black Association for Speech, Language, and Hearing. Now, I have been the chairman of the board of that association for 2 terms. Uh, I think my term ran from 2008 all the way until 2012. I'm still on the executive board of that organization. My term will expire in September 1, 2020. But that organization has been trying to help people become speech language pathologists and audiologists in this country. Our last count, we had about 3,000 African American speech language pathologists in this country, as opposed to the nearly 200,000 speech language pathologists that we have in this country. Now, this has really impacted the autism population because by there being such a small number of African American speech language pathologists, that means that many of the children diagnosed with autism are being evaluated by people that don't look like them, and in many cases don't talk like them. And so in some of those cases, we're sure that there's probably a number of misdiagnoses as well as some overdiagnosing of children with autism. And then it comes to the whole issue of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the clinician has that individual with autism because you have to kind of understand the culture. You have to kind of understand the background of the person. You have to kind of understand the environment in order to establish rapport, in order to have an understanding of how the child is performing and why the child might be performing in such a way, and what are the expectations of the parents? What are the expectations of the that there is a real close relationship between Black history, autism, and speech language pathology.
And I know another thing is I was looking when I was researching and stuff. It's a lot of studies that saying we know this because we live in every day in the autism community, but it's saying that African Americans and our kids are being diagnosed less than the other children for the spectrum. It's like they're getting diagnosed before us. We'll get another label, and before we get the label of autism for our kids.
And some of those labels are what? Behavior disorder, emotionally disturbed, learning disabled. We're seeing a lot of that happening. And a lot of that is happening is because the people doing the evaluating are not culturally competent. And what does that mean? Not being culturally competent means that they do not, in a sense, respect the culture that the person is coming from. When you are placed in a situation in which you have to evaluate someone, you should know something about that culture, and you should examine yourself to make sure that there is not something in your culture that would stand in the way of you evaluating that person. Now, what does that mean? That means that if part of your culture teaches you that Black people are not as smart as, say, white people, then you have a problem and you are not culturally competent.
Okay.
Or you might even say that Black people don't take care of their children. You might come from a culture that says that. Well, we all know that that's not true.
Definitely
But
not
that
true.
could surely stand in the way of you being able to perform an adequate evaluation of that child. So there are many factors that play into this whole cultural competency piece that we must examine carefully and help everybody become more aware of those factors. Because as you just said, there are a lot of children that are not receiving that diagnosis of autism.
Autism, right? They're not receiving the correct
They're
diagnosis.
not receiving the
So
correct
you can't
diagnosis.
get the correct help if you're
Cannot get
not
the correct
receiving the
services.
correct diagnosis. So you
Yes.
can, they're telling you, okay, maybe your child just has this, and then you're taking your child off this, then you find out, excuse me, later on that your child has autism. So
Or the one of the most famous ones we hear is, well, why don't you wait a while? Let's see, how let's see how they develop. Let's wait another year and see how they develop. So you spend a whole year not having services, and we know that the lack of services causes the problem to become worse.
wow. So that's we had started out with it was Hallie Q. Brown,
LQ Brown,
and she was
LQ
one of the
Brown.
first African American speech language pathologists.
Mm-hmm.
So we spoke about her being a renowned
Elocutionist,
elocutionist and educator in the late 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And
And the elocutionist comes from being eloquent with your speech.
oh, okay.
So
That's a new word for me. Thank you. And so we also had another African American,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first occupational therapists, Layla Lorenz.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's back in the 1960s also. And it says here that in her 1969 Eleanor Clark Slegg lecture, she presented a theory of occupational therapy based on human development, noting its influence on the neurophysiological,
Mm-hmm.
physical,
Neurophysiological.
neurophysiological,
Mm-hmm.
physical, and
Psychosocial.
psychodynamic aspects of development.
Mm-hmm.
And they said she chaired at the Research Advisory County Council in the mid 1980s, where she advocated for establishing doctoral level degrees and the value of both qualitative and quantitative
Mm-hmm.
methodologies.
Methodologies. Mm-hmm.
And she received a Jean Ayres Award and the president's commendation in honor of Wilma L. West. So she was one of the first African American occupational therapists to help serve our kids and get them the services that they need and the services that help them today.
Mm-hmm.
Occupational therapy is an important service that our kids need today, and speech therapy,
motor skills.
Yeah, it's very important service that our kids need today.
And we shouldn't overlook. You know, it has only been recently when African Americans have been allowed into many of the universities and colleges that award these types of degrees and certifications. It's only recently that we've been allowed into these things. So I think, during Black History Month, we also ought to give credit to the many parents and the many teachers who were not necessarily certified and licensed in speech language pathology or physical therapy or occupational therapy, but who worked with their children, worked with adults in helping them to improve their functioning, including them into their families and into society and the communities, because it is just recently when many African American families, if they had a child that had a problem, they would just keep them at home.
Mm.
Yeah, they would just keep them at home. I know.
Not because the schools didn't.
Because the schools were not accommodating, the schools were not offering services, and a lot of the racist and discriminatory practices, of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, parents, in order to protect their child, rather than to expose their child who had, say, autism or some other types of handicap, they would just keep them at home. They would just keep them at home. I know one of my neighbors who lived right next door had a handicapped child that just stayed in that house until the child passed. And the child passed about 18, 19 years of age. And we hardly ever knew that child was in there.
So she didn't take the child didn't go to school.
The child was cognitively impaired, physically impaired. And it's been the same with people on the spectrum. It's only been recently when they've even came up with this diagnosis of autism. Remember, autism they thought was a psychiatric condition, was a psychosis. And so, back in the heyday when mental hospitals were booming and mental institutions weren't even given a chance, and I'm the 50s and the 60s, and you probably weren't even born, but that's not that long ago.
No, it's not that long ago.
It's not that long ago.
Well, I know when the first time I heard, I had never heard of autism before. So, I mean, and that was what when George was 4. So that was 2003 when we first started hearing about that. And that was I was like autism. I didn't know what it was.
And the other day I was looking at some videotapes of George when he was 3 years old.
Oh, we got to see them tapes.
Got to see those tapes. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. George is 3.
But yeah, I definitely didn't know what it was. So, but I'm so glad, like you said, that we done came so far. Then from
just a few years ago. From just a few years ago. This is why programs like Blue Table Talk is so important. The information that you're exposing people to, because a lot of this stuff is new, and a lot of parents are still struggling with this whole issue of even having the child diagnosed or having the child misdiagnosed, improperly diagnosed, and in some cases overdiagnosed, because some of the kids they're diagnosing as autistic are not.
Yeah.
So, the learning process is for everybody involved, the child, the parent, the educator, the interventionist, the doctor, everybody involved. This is a learning process, and this is why it is so important to have that team, that teamwork,
Well, as like you said, there's no I in team, so so we all definitely need each other.
Yes.
But when you was just speaking on a lot of the African Americans and people who was doing things and starting organizations to help their kids and their children out, I want to speak about some of the stars that have kids that was diagnosed with autism. Yeah. We have we know Toni Braxton. Everybody knows Toni Braxton and her son Diesel. He was diagnosed with autism, and she was working with Autism Speaks. Now I'm not sure if she's still working with them or not, but I remember she used to go out and be a spokeswoman for them. So that was part of her helping, spread the word about autism. And then we got Tisha Campbell.
Tisha Campbell.
Right. Well, she divorced now, so I can't say Tisha Campbell Martin, but Tisha Campbell and her son, and she started her own organization to help spread the word. And we got Sean from Boys to Men. His son Micah, he was diagnosed, and I think his organization is called Micah's Voice. You heard of any of these organizations?
Sure, heard of this organization. And remember that autism was just given a real boost in federal funds, and a major autistic center has been just recently set up in Maryland. I don't think it's 2 weeks old. So there's a lot of funding that's going around. We talked about it some time ago that we need to find out what's happening in Illinois, with autism. I had a parent come to me not too long. Insurance is coming out of Pennsylvania, so we have to abide by. So unfortunately, they live in Illinois. And Illinois is the state that says if you have a child on the autism spectrum in between 0 and 21, and you have a comprehensive health program, then that health program must provide $32,000 to $36,000 a year for the treatment of autism from 0 to 21. Unfortunately, they can't use that, but there are some parents who have that insurance and are in Illinois and are unaware of the Brianna law that is here in Illinois.
We spoke about the Brianna law.
We spoke about the Brianna law.
So, but if you have health insurance and the up to $36,000 you said for one child. Okay, so if your insurance say, well, we're not covering that. So then you say, well, it's in the Brianna law in effect that I can get services for my child up to $36,000.
Well, I was talking with the representative from Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and they said that if your company that you work for, if that insurance doesn't allow it, contact them. And they will get on it. But you can also take it to the insurance board. There's a regulator of insurances here in Illinois. Remember, that's an Illinois law. Okay. So the insurance company must abide by the Illinois laws governing health insurance.
You say they must abide. Yeah. You have to make them abide.
Sometimes you got to make them abide.
You must abide, because I'm pretty sure it's some companies that's saying, oh no.
Yeah, but this being Black History Month, I think that people, especially Black people, should get more involved in the health and the welfare of our community. And autism is definitely in there. It is not enough just to send your child to the local public school and let them handle it. Making people more aware, taking your time. I mean, you could be at home doing whatever you want to do, but instead you are offering the world through YouTube information about autism and what can be done. People are saying autism can be cured, but how close are we to that? How close are most parents to that? Most parents are still struggling. They're still struggling with problems in the community. We've had some churches say, don't bring that child to church. That's really unfair. That church ought to create a space for that child, just like that other communities.
And that's why, like we said, that's why the organizations, the parents start organizations.
Yes.
Because they probably have took their child to a church.
That's right.
And felt that the child wasn't, treated okay. Like people was like, oh, what's going on over there? Because they don't know about autism.
Easter Seals was started by a father who was dissatisfied with the public school services. Autism Speaks was started by parents who were dissatisfied with the public school services. So the Brianna law was brought into effect by parents in Skokie who were dissatisfied with the public school services. So we can't just rely upon the public schools to do the job, because they don't have,
No.
many cases, the resources or the skilled people to handle those types of situations. So it must be a team effort. And many of the insurance companies are jumping on board to try to help. No longer are these children being placed in mental institutions to where they go to rot until they're
Yeah.
dead. We're finding out that by working with them, they can become productive and happy citizens.
Oh, okay. Sonia said I stopped going to church because they couldn't handle him at the daycare because he was stemming.
Mm,
So
yeah,
she had to stop going to church, and that's what we were just talking about. How that's a shame
yeah,
because they
yeah,
didn't understand what was everybody
yeah,
what stemming was. Her son was clapping his hands and rocking. That's called stemming,
yeah.
and a lot of people don't know what that is. So that's why you can go back to the old episode and look at me and Sonia talking about what is stemming. And a lot of people see our kids in the stores and out in the public, the malls, restaurants. That's why a lot of parents don't like to take their kids to the restaurant because they don't want to feel like they're looked at everyone staring at them. What's wrong with him? Because the child might be stemming. But if they knew what stemming was, and that's why we was bringing awareness to what is stemming. If they knew what stemming was, then they'll know that. Oh, they'll say, "Oh, he's just stemming right
Mm-hmm,
now. He'll
mm-hmm.
be okay in a little while." Mom or
But
dad will calm down a couple of minutes. They'll be eating dinner, having a good time in just a second.
but what do we see happening in other places? In other places, we see them creating environments accommodating. What I'm now seeing is they're putting stickers saying this place is sensory sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
That means that they are changing their environment to
Mm-hmm.
accommodate the child because they know that if they change themselves, the child will be able to where do we go? So we have to start educating ourselves. Why should places be allowed? And as some of the preachers would say, if you telling me you can't accommodate a child who has autism, who is sensory sensitive, but yet you can accommodate liars, fornicators,
Oh.
thieves, murderers. You can accommodate those up in the church. Why? Why can't you accommodate a child who simply has sensory issues and some language issues? So we got to address these issues. So I'm not going to go too far
Yeah.
into that.
Once you get started, you'll go all the way left. Sonia said, say it. Speak up for her son and her having to stop going to church because of her church didn't understand. And these churches are huge now. Like
Yeah.
my friend said on here, these churches are too huge to not have
Have too much money.
yeah, and yes. And
Take
not
some
to
of that
have,
road money.
they should have a section. Okay, this is for because the numbers are rising with autism. So it's
Mm-hmm.
1 in 59,
Mm-hmm.
and that was last year number.
Mm-hmm.
So every
And
year,
in some places it's higher than that. 1 in 43.
yeah, 1 in 42, and one, and so they should have everyone. It's on a rise. Every time I meet somebody, it's oh yeah, my sister, my
Mm-hmm.
niece,
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
cousin, oh my friend. So I don't understand why the public places are not like getting involved with
Becoming
more
sensory sensitive.
Yeah, but like you said, the stickers I have seen the couple on the
Mm-hmm.
restaurant.
Sensory sticker.
Also the menu.
Mm-hmm.
I have
Mm-hmm.
seen the whole lot of menu with gluten free
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the autism kids eat gluten free
Mm-hmm.
products. So
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of menus now with the gluten free products. Way before everybody got on the health kick stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's a good thing. And then, like you said, the sensory friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Or I see a lot of the play the place where the kids go and play like the jump around places and stuff like that. They'll have a sensory. They have a whole day because they know how some of the kids can't deal with the noise and stuff. So they'll have a day where they close down, and that day is just for all of the sensory kids. So I see that a lot, even though it can have more of those days, but at least they're trying.
Sure, they're trying. They're trying within their means. They're doing something. And that's what we think. That people, you can't do it all, but you can do something. And that, even if it's just a little bit, like they say in the church, the person who comes in and puts in $1 is no different than the person who puts in $100. So if you can make some, if that's what you can afford, if that's within your means, we can't let people just sit back and not do it because they feel as though they don't have enough to do it with. Everybody has something that they can contribute. If you can't contribute money, you can contribute time. If you can't contribute time, you ought to be able to contribute space. If you can't contribute space, you ought to be able to contribute a word or two. So,
and that's it. That's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
And a word is, if you, like you say, you don't have $1, a word is way better than that dollar, because that word is spread, and tell that person that you spread the word to spread the word to another person. So that's a fact. And another, Holly Robinson Pete and her husband.
Okay.
So I forgot which team.
Oh, it's so many. It's so many. When you start talking about 1 in 43, even if you say 1 in 50 something, that's an awful lot. That means in almost every classroom, and a half in America, there is a person with autism. And how many kids are going undiagnosed? How many are going misdiagnosed? Would those numbers change? I think they would if more children were diagnosed, if more children were not misdiagnosed.
Well, we just discussed that about how in the African American community, how the kids are being misdiagnosed or not diagnosed. But I remember this too in my earlier years. Do you remember when all the kids was in one classroom?
We called it the dummy room.
Right, they called it the LD room, the learning disability room.
The handicap
room.
room.
Right, so I'm so glad we came far from that.
And before we had that room, handicapped children had to be bused to a special handicapped school. They couldn't go to school with regular kids.
So they weren't even in
They weren't even in the public schools. But then as the numbers began to increase, so they said, hey, and the variety of the different types of handicaps became so much greater. Then they said, well, we can't send all of these kids to the special handicap school, so why don't we try to keep some in the local school? And that's when they started that classroom where they had all types of handicaps in one room.
Yeah, I remember that. Just thinking about it, I'm like,
and that wasn't that long ago.
Right.
We're talking about the 50s, 60s, and even some of the 70s.
Well, yeah, when I was in school, there was just one room. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then, a couple of years later, and then now when I'm going and looking for schools, it wasn't that many schools that had autism class.
Right. No.
So it's like, we don't have that in this school.
And they still don't.
Yeah. And then especially, this was the killer.
They still putting them all in the same room.
This was the killer. We have a lower autism class, but we got to go to a whole nother school.
Because they had so little knowledge about autism.
But a kid that had trouble with change had to keep changing schools because one school didn't have a upper or intermediate classroom. So you had to go to another school. So that's why your kid, now he went to this school when he was younger. Now he graduated from this school. That always, I was just like, I didn't understand that. I never understood that, because I was just like, why wouldn't you have both? If you have one, you need to have both so that they stay in the same school just like everybody else. So.
Wow. And we're still learning about this whole process. This is why parents must be involved.
I've been, and I want to get my autism moms out there into the communication. I want to bring my autism sisters my AFU sisters or any mom who in Chicago, want to come to the Blue Table, because I was on a couple of the Autism Moms group, and they make the post, and the post that I was seeing, one post was saying that, the mom, she was having a rough day, and we all been there. But this
Mm-hmm.
is a new mom. So for the new moms that's going through this, it's rough for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I want, to discuss that. So that's what Blue Table Talk is about. And, I want to discuss that your days will get better. So even though it's rough right now, your tears will turn into cheers. It's gonna take a while, and you're gonna have to put in the hard work, but they will turn into cheers or tears right now. So just that post, it kind of caught me off guard. Um, that was the beginning of the week, because the
Mm-hmm.
mom was saying she was ready to end it all,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't stopped thinking about that post since I read that post, and that made me think, wow, this is what I'm doing Blue Table Talk for, and I want my moms to come on this table and how we can express and reach out to their sister through the YouTube, the Facebook, or whatever, because she didn't live in Chicago. And I'm so glad that we do have
Mm-hmm.
the different groups that we all communicate with each other on, because that was really touching, and I just can't stop thinking about it. So again, to the mom, if you're watching this, I hope your day is better than it was at the beginning of the week. And some of the moms whose kids are older, we all been there, and those days was rough. And I know it's rough for you right now, but I pray that your days get better, and it will get better for you. So just keep your head up and stay strong and keep fighting and doing what you have to do for your child. And I trust me, it'll get better. So yeah, the other autism moms in the groups that they had saw the post too. So yeah, but I need you to come on the Blue Table Talk, Sonia. I'm gonna call you out because I've been waiting on you to come back on, because we can, connect with that mom, share our stories, and tell our life experiences, because we've been there. I know George is older. He a little older, so I've been on this rodeo ride, not a long time, but I've been in the fight, and I'm still in the fight, and I'm willing to fight and to help any mom, dad, parents, other organizations. We all in this together, and that's the reason why Blue Table Talk is here. So if you're interested in Blue Table Talk, speech therapists, occupational therapists, moms, dads, parents, educators, aides, bus aides, anybody who's dealing with the community, autism community, or special needs community, please feel welcome to come on the Blue Table Talk and discuss your experience with us and everybody else on YouTube and Facebook Live. And I want to leave by saying that we also have our first AFU, All Families United. We have our first fundraiser coming up April the 4th at Panda Express on a 1654 West 119th Street. So I want everybody to come out and help support us. We give back. We have events at Christmas, and we give back to the homeless and kids. We do the Letters for Santa. So our fundraisers is to help support our kids in need and other special needs families. So please come out. That's on April the 4th, 2020, and that's at Panda Express, 1654 West 119th Street. And always, if you everybody shopping on Amazon, please use Amazon Smile and pick All Families United as your organization. And while you shop, they will donate to us. And if you're looking for the best speech therapist in Chicago, please come on down to Break Speech, 5228 South Blackstone. And the number is 773-493-2000. So we hope you enjoyed this Blue Table Talk. And please tune in next week. This will conclude our Autism and Black History Month. Leave a comment. And if you know anyone with a child with special needs, share this, have them like, subscribe, and thumbs up and hit the notification bell so when we come on next week, you can get your notifications because we'll probably be more on YouTube and I'll share it on Facebook. But please, if share it to anyone you know so you all could see us live on YouTube because I want to get everybody in the live chat and we could communicate with each other and talk through the chat. So thank you all for watching again and good night. See you next week.
Yeah. All right. That's another one in the